Part 1, Question 3, Article 2, whether God is composed of matter and form. This should not sound like sophisticated philosophical jargon. It's really quite straightforward, because what consists of matter and form? Everything. So here's a way to rephrase that question. Is God a thing that exists in the universe? And Thomas says, no, God does exist, but he is not a thing to be categorized and classified in the universe. He is not one thing among others. He is not a body. And here Thomas is citing the previous article as his authority, which is a rare thing for him to do. Anything composed of matter and form is a body, but Thomas just proved that God is not a body. Zeus and Thor, they are bodies. God, the true God, not a body, and therefore God is not composed of matter and form. But does that mean that God has no soul? The soul, according to Aristotle, is the form of the body, and Scripture speaks of things being, quote, pleasing to God's soul. Objection 2. Scripture also speaks of God's anger and his joy. Thomas calls these sorts of emotions, quote, passions of the composite. Think about it. A purely physical rock has no emotion. None at all. Neither does a purely spiritual equation. Joy happens when matter moves towards the form that it ought to have. Anger, when matter moves away from the form it ought to have or degrades. Objection 3. Matter, according to Thomas, is the, quote, principle of individualization. Since God is an individual, he must consist of matter. That's objection 3, but it is not true. Thomas's answer returns to the fact that God is pure act. Matter is potential, a potential statue, a potential house, a potential fire. God is pure act. God is the first cause, and causes act through forms. Causes act on matter. But a first cause cannot be matter, and God cannot be imperfect. Again, this all goes back to the 5 ways. Substances that consist of matter and form owe their perfection to their form. God cannot owe his perfection to anything or anyone. A perfectly round ball owes its perfection to a pre-existing form of roundness. Nothing pre-exists God. And as we see Thomas blasting away at the notion of a material God, remember that everything in the universe is made this way, matter and form. God, again, is not one thing among others in the universe. Reply to objection 1. Quote, a soul is attributed to God because his acts resemble the acts of a soul. Again, it's Scripture using analogy. And in a similar way, joy and anger are attributed to God because he rewards and he punishes. This does not imply, however, that God can either be improved or degraded. God is impassible. God is perfect, infinite perfections. And objection 3 is answered with, quote, forms which can be received in matter are individualized by matter. I imagine gingerbread cookies. Each one is the same gingerbread cookie. It's the same recipe. It's the same shape. It's the same taste and appearance. But they're made of different matter. And that's what separates this one, what individualizes this cookie from that cookie. Quote, but the form which cannot be received in matter and is self-subsisting, this form is individualized precisely because it cannot be received into a subject, and such is the form of God. Again, God simply cannot be material because he is perfect, he is perfectly actual, he is the first cause. Cannot be matter and form, cannot be material. And then I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what about the incarnation? And Thomas will get to the incarnation, but right now we're talking about true God and true man. We're talking about the true God part of the incarnation, but it's definitely something to keep in our minds as we know what's in Thomas's mind. But no, God is not made of matter and form.